Welcome to the Virginia Woods. My name is Fred Singer and I want to talk about my textbook, Ecology in Action. Now, you might wonder, why would someone write an ecology textbook? In my case, there are several reasons. One is that there is a history of insanity that runs deep throughout my family. Second is that I truly enjoy writing. And the third reason, and perhaps the most important, is that I've spent the bulk of my time teaching at a university that values teaching over everything else. And as a result of that, I've spent a huge amount of time thinking about how to teach ecology, and the textbook Ecology in Action is the result of that time that I spent thinking about how to teach ecology. Now, Ecology in Action is a textbook, but it's also a bit of a personal narrative. It's personal in the language that I use, which is somewhat informal, more informal than you'll find in most textbooks. It's personal in my focus on asking questions, which is something that I really encourage my students to do and something that I subject my students to on a routine basis. And it's personal in that I present discovery in ecology as an inherently nonlinear process, at least in some cases. And my reason for doing so is that I believe that discovery is a nonlinear process, and I'm trying to teach students about the process of discovery. Now, the first chapter contains the same concepts that you would find in most other ecology books. In other words, I talk about what is ecology, what are ecological questions. I talk about what types of methodology do ecologists use, and I talk about different levels of the biological hierarchy that are explored by ecologists. But it's different in several ways that I think is going to be informative, and it's different enough that I think most students will actually read the first chapter and subsequent chapters, and as a result of that, you instructors will have the luxury of knowing that your students have done the reading, and you'll be able to spend your lecture time building upon that knowledge that the students already have, rather than having to go through the book point by point. What I want to do now is talk about the approach that I take in the first chapter to address those questions and other questions in ecology. Chapter 1 of Ecology in Action is different from other ecology texts in that I introduce the research of one ecologist, Tony Sinclair. I begin by introducing students to a young Tony Sinclair living within Tanzania, and he's becoming very familiar with both the animals and plants there, and also with the people there and their culture, and also learns to speak Swahili in the process. Later on, Sinclair experiences some teenage angst. He's trying to figure out what to do with his life. Later on still, he realizes, hey, I can become an ecologist. I can go back to Tanzania and study the animals and plants that I love. So he goes back to Tanzania. He works his way into the Serengeti Research Institute, and he starts studying the buffalo problem, as they describe it, which is that the researchers there believed, but didn't have any documentation yet, that the number of buffalo had been increasing dramatically over the past decade. Sinclair is able to show that this is indeed the case, despite the fact that buffalo run away from him whenever he got close to them. And he then turned his attention to trying to understand why this phenomenon was happening. So he considered three hypotheses for what was causing this. One was that the number of predators had gone down. A second was that the amount of grass and the quality of grass had increased within the Serengeti. And finally, he thought perhaps the incidence of rinderpest, which is a virus that afflicts ruminants such as wildebeest and buffalo, had gone down, and therefore allowing the population of these large ruminants to increase. Chapter 1 is a series of hypotheses, predictions, careful observations, ultimately creation of models, and ultimately Sinclair was able to demonstrate that yes, rinderpest was basically gone, and the timing of the disappearance of rinderpest coincided with the dramatic increase in the population size of the ruminants. In so doing, Sinclair worked with many different researchers operating on many different levels of the biological hierarchy. He was able to later on show that there were important abiotic linkages and biotic linkages. Fire and precipitation played an important role in this ecosystem, and his most recent research shows that El Niño Southern Oscillation, again this is done with many different scientists, is having an important impact on the population cycles that are operating within the Serengeti.